Joseph DeAngelo is a former police officer and one of America's most dangerous serial killers. A model family man and a working man with a steady income, he hid his gruesome secret for decades. In the 1980s, DeAngelo plagued several California counties. He stalked his victims for long periods of time, then broke into their homes. It was only in 2018 that the elusive criminal was able to get on the trail. How did this happen? How many murders does DeAngelo have on his record? And why was he fired from the police force? A little strange, but nice grandfather, so neighbours spoke about Joseph James DeAngelo. No one would have thought that this seemingly harmless old man was a real monster. He has 13 proven murders, dozens of rapes, and over 100 burglaries to his credit. For years, he terrorized California and yet remained invisible. The Golden State Killer, as he was nicknamed in the US, was born in 1945. DeAngelo's childhood was far from cloudless. Sometime he lived with his parents at a military base in Germany. His father, a sergeant in the US Army, often beat him and punished, and once young Joseph witnessed a terrible incident. They say that one of his sisters, there were 4 children in the family, was raped by 2 pilots. And that's what he saw. Maybe that's where he got his aberration from, affected his psyche. The Visalia burglar and the East Area Rapist. Immediately after high school, Joseph DeAngelo enlisted in the US Navy and went to the Vietnam War. He came back from there with medals. He attended university, earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and went to work for the police in the burglary unit. It was the 70s. Just at that time, a criminal dubbed the Visalia burglar was operating in the California town of Visalia. He was breaking into the homes of the locals. He'd break whatever he could. He'd throw women's underwear around the rooms. Took usually low-end stuff with him. No one could catch this perp because he left no trace. Much later, it would turn out that the Visalia burglar was DeAngelo himself, said forensic scientist Paul Houle. A police officer who led a double life raped a 23-year-old girl in her own home in 1976. He watched his victim for several hours, waiting for her to be alone. Then he picked the lock and broke into the bedroom. Fortunately, the girl survived, but was unable to identify the rapist because he was wearing a mask. In the 70s, DeAngelo raped 50 girls from eastern cities in Northern California, for which he was nicknamed the Eastern Neighborhood Rapist. But back then, no one had any idea who was behind these crimes, the expert said, for what DeAngelo was nicknamed the real night hunter. In 1979, Joseph DeAngelo was caught shoplifting. He tried to take out a hammer and dog repellent spray. For the misdemeanor, he was fired from the police force and sentenced to probation. After that, the Eastern Neighborhood Rapist dropped off the radar. But in Southern California, the real night hunter appeared. In December 1979, the bodies of a couple were found in a private home in Santa Barbara County. The perpetrator tied them up, abused the woman, and then shot both of them with a gun. In March 1980, another married couple was found dead in the city of Ventura. The husband and wife had been beaten to death with a log. In August of the same year, a medical student and his lover were found dead in the city of Dana Point. DeAngelo carefully planned his crimes. He chose one-story houses that were easy to get into and where wealthy people lived. Having waited for a convenient moment, under the cover of Night Maniac penetrated into the house. That's why he was nicknamed the real Night Hunter. The people inside didn't have time to react. DeAngelo would blind them with the bright light of a flashlight and immediately tie them hand and foot using nautical knots. He was masterful at covering his tracks, leaving virtually no evidence. He worked carefully, with gloves, respectively, could not leave sweat marks on the skin of his victims and any objects. The elusive killer was searched all over California. Local newspapers regularly printed a sketch of him, based on the descriptions of survivors. But the sketch was inaccurate. DeAngelo never removed his mask during the crimes, so all eyewitnesses could see was his athletic build, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Police officers searched the crime scenes thoroughly, trying to find anything, but the only thing they had on hand was a DNA sample of the maniac. In those years, it was useless evidence because there was no DNA database of criminals yet. The criminalist pointed out, same crime pattern. In 1986, the murders stopped abruptly. This really surprised investigators. Such behavior is not typical of maniacs. It was assumed that he died or went to prison for some other crime. Nevertheless, the serial killer continued to be searched for. The fact that the rapist of the eastern districts and the real Night Hunter, the same person, for a long time, no one guessed. It wasn't until the mid-90s that Detective Larry Crompton noticed that the crimes in different parts of California were very similar. At first it was assumed that it was different maniacs committing the crimes, but in the end it turned out that the MO was the same. First the victim was blinded, then tied up. The second point is that there was always a mask, gloves on. Larry Crompton combined these corpus delicti and pointed out that it was really one person, the lawyer said. But even this discovery did not help to catch the maniac. How the elusive maniac was figured out. Years passed, no new clues, and evidence did not appear. The sketch has already become irrelevant. The case of the killer from the Golden State sent to the archives. But in the early 2010s, the investigation was reopened. Detective criminalist Paul Hoole came up with a great idea. He came across a service for finding relatives through DNA testing and decided to use it to get on the criminal's trail. First, I checked out how it worked. I took a DNA test and uploaded my details to the service. The site gave me information about my immediate and distant relatives. After that, I uploaded the DNA data of the Golden State Killer there. The criminalist shared details. In the same way, the program found the relatives of the dangerous criminal. Then, based on the obtained data, the specialists made a genealogical tree of the killer and thus narrowed down the circle of suspects to 5 people. Among them was the one who most of all fit the description of the maniac, a pensioner from Sacramento, Joseph James DeAngelo. He was placed under surveillance. The surveillance was set up so that there was an opportunity to get DNA material. We could see what places he dines at, where he goes. We take some household items, that is, move a chair, bring a plate, a lot more like that. Was surprised by his arrest. Police managed to take a sample of DeAngelo's DNA. It completely matched the Night Hunter's DNA. In 2018, the elusive maniac was finally apprehended. Almost all this time, he lived quietly in the suburbs of Sacramento, worked as an auto mechanic, raised children and grandchildren. DeAngelo himself was surprised by his arrest. He didn't think he could ever be arrested at all. After his arrest, DeAngelo claimed that he was driven to the crimes by an inner personality named Jerry. In 1986, he finally got over it and therefore stopped committing murders. At the trial, the real night hunter apologized to the relatives of the victims. "I've listened to all of your testimony, and I'm really sorry for causing so much pain," the serial killer said. Joseph DeAngelo was originally going to be sentenced to death, but the Golden State Killer fully pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and the court gave him life in prison without parole.